I recently came across this map of Europe. Every colorful line represents a route you can take overnight on a sleeper train, and 3 of these routes debuted in the same week last year. That's huge when you consider where Europe's sleeper train industry was less than a decade ago. In 2016, Germany's national rail company Deutsche Bahn announced it couldn't turn a profit on its sleeper train operations and shut them down completely. Europe's sleeper train system looked as though it was never waking back up, but then it did, and now we have this. The sleeper train revolution appears to be catching on in the US too.
Welcome to the train.
95 hours from Vancouver to Toronto.
But unlike in Europe, the comeback story of sleeper trains in America is showing less potential, and there's a reason for that. So how did the sleeper train suddenly return to the tracks of Europe? And what will it take for it to work here? To find out, I consulted a transportation expert and dug into a lot more maps. Not to mention, I actually jumped on an overnight sleeper train. Here we go. And traveled nearly 800 miles from LA to Albuquerque. What I learned and experienced along the way,
I'm definitely gonna hit my head,
is both good and bad news for the American sleeper train.
To really thrive is gonna take some creativity and investment.
It's 5:08. I'm here at Union Station in Los Angeles, and I have a little bit of downtime before my sleeper train boards, which is really good because honestly, getting here took a minute. Compared to Europe, sleeper train options here in the US are slim, as I'm finding out trying to book one right now. I'll show you what I mean, but first, subscribe to The Hustle so you never miss a video like this one. The Amtrak network currently operates just 14 long-distance routes that you can travel in a sleeping car that looks something like this. But there were once hundreds of sleeper train routes to choose from across the country. The very first one traveled along the Cumberland Valley Railroad through Pennsylvania in 1836. But it wasn't until 1865 that the concept of the modern American sleeper train was born. That's when an engineer named George Pullman transformed the average sleeper train car into a luxury experience, complete with lounges, dining rooms, and sleeping berths. And for the next century, sleeper trains would remain the most popular way to travel long distances across the US. But then they started to disappear. And that makes sense when you think about how popular flying starts to become in the 1950s. Not to mention the development of the interstate highway system, which in many cases made driving your own car faster than taking a train. And for the next 60 years, sleeper trains pretty much remained obsolete until the summer of 2022.
36 million people are expected to travel between Thursday and Monday by car.
The travel stress is expected to get even worse this 4th of July weekend.
More than 200 domestic flights have already been canceled today.
Between skyrocketing gas prices and chaos at airports, we started looking for long-distance travel alternatives, which led us back to Amtrak. The company doesn't use the language sleeper train, but you can sleep in one of 4 private room options while traveling its long-distance network. And for my first sleeper train trip in the US, I've booked a roomette on Amtrak's Southwest Cheap Line. I'll go from LA through the high desert of California, up to Flagstaff, Arizona, and finally make my way to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Here we go, up the stairs. All right, here we go. All right. Made it to our room on the sleeper train. Come on in. I am in the roomette and it's not bad. There's a decent amount of space, especially when you sit down. The seats are really comfortable too. And I have a great view out the window here, so I'm really excited about the scenery that I'm gonna see on this trip to Albuquerque. I think we're about to go.
This is your last call for Los Angeles.
Here we go. Traveling from LA to Albuquerque is roughly the same distance as traveling from Vienna to Paris, an overnight route that's operated today by Europe's sleeper train leader, NightJet. Remember that story I mentioned earlier about Deutsche Bahn shutting down its sleeper train operations in 2016? So they didn't hang on to their sleeper trains, they actually sold them to the National Passenger Rail Company of Austria, which owns and operates NightJet. That's a really good salad. Without that purchase, it's safe to say that Europe's sleeper train ecosystem wouldn't be as robust as it is today. Amtrak police. But headlines about Europe's sleeper train resurgence didn't officially emerge until 2019. And since then, overnight bookings have increased by 147%, mainly because of this.
I want Europe to become the first climate-neutral continent in the world by 2050.
One of the ways it plans to do that is by investing in smarter transport, not only to meet environmental goals, but a growing demand for rail travel too. I wanted to learn more, so I reached out to Jonathan English, a transportation fellow at NYU.
Sleeper trains in Europe are coming back in part for environmental reasons, and also in part because there is a comfort aspect. You can arrive in first thing the next morning. There's also a lot of vacationers who go to Europe, and for them, a sleeper train often makes a lot of sense. They'd be paying for a hotel. Otherwise, they can carry as many bags as they want. It's not restricted like on a plane.
And it seems like Europe has put way more dollars behind updating their railroad infrastructure than we have.
Where the money is being spent is very different. But yes, there's no question. Government has spent a lot in Europe on keeping its rail infrastructure in good condition and modernizing it for passenger rail. And that has not happened to anywhere near the same extent in the United States.
Take that night jet route I mentioned from Paris to Vienna. It takes 14 hours and costs just $160 US. My current Amtrak trip, which travels the same distance, takes 16 hours and costs about $700. That's almost $500 more expensive than taking a direct flight, which is a big reason why Amtrak's long-distance rail network has barely grown in the last 60 years. The reality is, more people are actually taking long-distance Amtrak trains. It's the reason Amtrak is investing millions of dollars into upgrading its current sleeper cars and eventually plans to replace its existing fleet. But here's the problem. When you look at a map of our national rail network, it looks like this. But when you look at the routes operated by Amtrak solely for long-distance passenger rail, it looks like this. That's because the US railroad system favors transporting stuff, not people. Even the tracks themselves were built longer and wider to carry more freight, which today makes for really slow passenger trains.
Also just like more of a jerky movement, like it's harder to sleep if you're constantly stopping and starting. And it's a little bit harder because freight trains don't run on a precise schedule. So that's one of the things that makes it a little bit harder to work in the US than in Europe, where everything is designed with priority for passenger trains and they fit freight trains in where they can.
Unlike the railroads of Europe, ours are owned by private freight companies, not by the government, which means they aren't required to use their tracks for passenger service. It also means Amtrak pays host railroads like Canadian National and Union Pacific hundreds of millions of dollars every year to use their tracks, which may be why tickets are so expensive. Am I correct that Amtrak has never, as a company, been profitable in its 50-plus year history?
It hasn't. And I think it's probably unrealistic to expect it to be profitable. Certain routes can maybe be profitable. The lines in Europe that make money are the ones where there's a train every, 10 minutes and they're all full. And those do turn an operating profit in some cases. But you're not going to get to that point until you have really, really, really good service that's going to take a lot of money up front.
And some of that money is already taking effect. Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure package plans to spend $80 billion improving and expanding passenger rail in America. That includes adding 30 new routes to Amtrak's network in the next decade. It is quiet hours now on the train, so it's time to actually get some sleep. Literal strap so you don't fall off the bed. Okay. Okay, there we go. It's 11:15 p.m. and it is finally time to get some sleep on the sleeper train. I'm all tucked in and ready to go to bed, and I will see you guys in Arizona. Good night. It is about 7:30 a.m. and I am extremely tired, hence the coffee. Right around midnight, we started to pick up some steam and you could really feel the tracks underneath us. The beds are decently comfortable, but the bathroom situation could use some improvement. All that to say, a luxury sleeper train experience in the US isn't totally out of reach. A startup out of Southern California called Dreamstar Lines has proposed building a luxury hotel train that could run overnight from LA to San Francisco starting in 2025. And they seem to be making progress. This year, the company signed a milestone collaboration agreement with Union Pacific that would allow them to use almost all of the railroad tracks between the two cities. The last time a sleeper train made that journey was in 1968, and Amtrak's current service only runs during the day. In Europe, a startup called Midnight Trains is building a similar luxury train service that will run from Paris to 12 cities across the continent. Cocktails, comfier beds, and lower carbon emissions are all pretty great, but what will really carry the sleeper train into the future is having the right infrastructure. And in the US, we're still operating on a rail network that was designed to build a country rather than transport its residents from state to state. Still, there is something kind of cool about falling asleep in the high desert of California and waking up in the high desert of New Mexico. Less romantic than falling asleep in Prague and waking up in Venice, but hey, we'll take what we can get. More adventures to come on the Hustle YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and get the latest tech and business news over at thehustle.co.